So, we left off. Here we were. I saw before we left, aside from all the number 4s, which that was fun. I knew we would need one of those in there. I saw some number 1s. I saw we had some that had sort of a multi-number thing going on there. Patricia, she shared with me what her I got a cool idea was. Does anybody else at this point had a cool idea or something you're thinking about or whatever? Okay, we got some nods. That's good. We're gonna flesh those out. So that's good. Anybody in that? It's okay. Anybody you can. You're among friends. We're all friends here. Anybody still in the 2 zone? Just really not feeling this? Not getting it. This is just oh my God. Why am I here?
I'm not seeing a 1.5 here yet.
You're at 1.5. Okay. I'll take 1.5. Maybe a little 3 thrown in there too. What about?
Yeah.
Anybody sitting at 3? They have a burning question. And they're kind of like, what about? I was thinking about. Okay. Just check it in. Because again, we don't want to get too far down the road and let bad stuff in. The bad, get it out. Let me know now. All right. I just want to mention, because in just talking to various people and things, a couple of things in the resources that I was just going to highlight. Some of you seem interested in the story part and in the hardcore gamer resource part on page 6. I have a reference there for a book on twine.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if any of you have used it yet. Anybody? If you get a chance to, so looks like something maybe. It looks. I mean, I haven't used it a lot. I have worked with some people that have done a little more extensive stuff.
I've seen some stuff done with it.
Yeah, I think it's actually got a lot of possibilities. So that's why I threw that one in there. It's sort of a low risk way to get yourself into. You don't have to be real techy to handle it. So what?
So a lot of people have been teaching the flying piece on there.
Okay, so yeah, it's a different. I was just getting a feel because some places I go, people are like, never heard of it. Some people are like, oh yeah, we do that. We like it. It's open source.
It's like animation software, right?
It's basically a very simple way to do interactive fiction. So basically, think of PowerPoint. You make a box and you put in this. And you have to learn a little bit of syntax. Yeah, you have to learn a little syntax, but if I put it in brackets, if I put it in double brackets, that means it's a link, and then it splits off, and I can have the student choose this one or this one, and then branching. So it just says branching.
Oh, so it helps. It builds in the branching.
It builds the branching for you.
Can it do math?
You can make that.
You make it
do whatever you want.
A story that it has to solve a problem.
But it doesn't have like a math editor.
I don't know.
I think they make it a little bit more basic.
Yeah, I think at this point,
It depends on what kind of math
it's
you're talking about.
I was trying to find you one. If you remind me.
Could you write it on the word and then cut and paste?
Yeah.
It's more like a visual novel.
Yeah.
Thing. I don't know if you know what a visual novel is.
Yeah.
Probably not.
The thing is, it's free.
It's free. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's free and it's relatively simple.
So, but what about?
Well, you can't
what
really
about?
But what about the fact that there's all these tools out there that do text very nicely and don't do math?
Well, there's some
Really
different
different
times.
slightly,
But you
you know,
might be algebra
it's all
tool.
visual novel.
I think you can link out. So I think you could link out the math and then go back into or maybe.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
But I think it presents in a way that's different.
Just because she said it.
Is this the final product as well?
No, that's not the final product. This is how you create it and everything like that. The final product will look like a story that you interact with.
Okay.
And so if you look at like,
It's like, is it end up like a choosing?
Yeah, you're building your own. You're sort of building your own. But again, it's sort of more barrier.
Well, very often you've got chemists, so the ability to do something other than straight text is always
Yes.
a hurdle.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called algebra by hand. So I don't know if any of you have looked at that. It's actually a pretty cool tool
being developed.
that lets you drag and drop to learn your algebra. Okay. But we'll work on it. Maybe one of you will be the one to create the thing. Okay, I think that's all others I think. All right, so let us move on. So the rest of today, we're going to spend building a game plan. And I call it game plan because this is just my easy way to remember things and spell it out for people. Again, not necessarily going to be making a game, but I think you'll start to see that, you know, if I'm building a course and maybe it's a story or something, maybe part of the story is that I go into this place where I have to play this game to get some skill or something that helps me solve the problem that is in the story so I can help my character along or something like that. So again, the game is not the point. The game is a tool. And I love games for that. I love game-based learning. I started out researching that before I got into gamification. And I think there's great stuff, but again, depending on your topic, sometimes there's not, you know, a lot of stuff readily at hand that suits your needs and, you know, how to incorporate it. But so game plan here is going to stand for goals, audience, mechanics, and experience. And this is sort of my structure that I encourage people to use when they're trying to work out how they're going to gamify something. Okay, so we're going to spend time talking about each of these. But basically, goals, and we're going to talk about goals at a lot of different levels and a lot of different angles. That's why I laughed when I walked in and I saw the big poster on the board, on the wall for goals. I was like, we're going to talk about that. Audience is huge. As I said, I'm always putting the learner at the center. We're going to talk about some different ways to think about the audience and how to work with them. And we're going to focus more on motivation than just, okay, I have 27 students in this class and there's, 14 boys, and, demographic stuff. We're going to get out beyond that. Mechanics. Now, mechanics here, I'm going to use in a larger frame than just the technical term game mechanics. I'm talking about you are the mechanic. You are going to figure out how to fit this all together. Okay, so in that sense. Now, part of that will be selecting our game elements and how are we going to integrate them and which ones work better with our situation. And then finally, we're going to wrap it all together. This is not a linear process, by the way. This is kind of chaotic and haphazard and iterative. But again, always coming back to what experience am I creating? How is this going to affect the experience? Because your students are having an experience. I know they're coming to class, but they're experiencing it. And so we always have to come back to that. So we'll talk about some things to think about with that. So first, let's get into talking about goals. And like I said, we're going to talk about it from a couple of different angles and perspectives. And again, goals is one of those kind of fuzzy words. In some instances, goals is going to be referring to your learning objectives. In some cases, goals is going to be bigger than that. So we're going to think bigger, smaller, and upside down kind of in this. So, there we go again. All right, so first thing is, and this is a piece when people first get into gamification, a lot of gamification initiatives fail very quickly, right out of the gate. And a lot of times they failed because people did not take the time to really figure out what the goal is. What is the problem I'm trying to solve here? Am I just using this because I heard gamification was fun and it's going to make my learners, magically happy and, all that? It's not, okay? So, definite goals get you results. Not definite goals don't get you indefinite results. They get you nothing, okay? We have to be really clear about what we want. See, I'm back to precision. It's going to be definite. All right. And just for the humorous approach to that is, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else, right? And that's often what happens to us is we end up someplace else. We don't want to do it. And I know I had something I was going to say here that was really enlightening. Oh, I know what it was. Going back to the cards that I had you fill out at the very beginning, and having you state a goal, and also state what you were planning to do. That was very intentional, and it was intentional because there's a study that came out of Stanford where they took students, and one group they worked with, and they just kind of said, okay, here's a reminder, there's going to be an exam. You know, they did sort of the traditional, we'll call it traditional. The traditional, okay, it's now 6 weeks till the exam. You know, like, you probably want to think about that. You know, they just left it at that. Just a reminder kind of thing. The other group, they spent about 15 minutes, okay? Just 15 minutes, not a long time. They had the students think about how am I going to prepare? They had them make a plan, not just, oh, I'm going to do the assignments. I'm going to, you know, like, okay, are you going to meet with a study group? How are you going to arrange that? Who are the people? You know, really think about how they were going to prepare for the exam. They had them set those type of goals, which is totally separate from necessarily the individual topic of what they were learning. But they wanted them to think about how they were going to learn this material. And on average, the students that went through that little brief 15-minute planning session, okay, and they had some assistance with that, they on average scored a third of a grade higher. Okay? So they bumped them. They could bump them from a B- up to, to the A's. They could really bump these kids up pretty significantly. Or from a B+ to an A-, sorry. That is, you know what, if it's not, I will make sure you have the link. That was, I wrote it in here because I think I found it. I found the link later than I had already prepared the handout. But if not, I will make sure I get you the source for that. But it was just a really, I think that's something that we could think about. Especially, a lot of times we have learners who, we know how to learn. We've been doing it for a long time. But a lot of times they really don't. And we overlook that piece that sometimes they do need that. I don't know how to approach, I have no idea how to approach doing this.
Well, I know, and a lot of us were high-level learners to start with. We liked
Yes.
school, we were good at it to start with. That's why we went to graduate school and so on. And some of the things that I have to say to my students just absolutely floors me. Like, when your instructor says, this is going to be on the test, make sure that you learn it. You have to say that to some of the freshman classes, that when you're, because I asked a student one time, he talked to the achievement coach and said, and I came back and did really well. I said, so what'd she tell you? When the teacher says this is going to be on the test, make sure you know how to do it. And my jaw hit the floor. Well, I just kind of sat there. I really didn't think in college I would have to say that to a student. But yeah, and there was a great sci-fi, anyway, there's a story, but there was a line in a sci-fi book that said, is this college English professor who ends up in an alternative land and becomes fantasy and becomes the king. He says he's got to talk to these really, really simpletons, but he had taught college freshmen, so he was really used to overstating the obvious.
That unfortunately is part of the gig. That is. You got to meet the learner where they are. Okay? Because that's our gig. Our gig is, here's where the learner is, here's where we need them to be, how do I get them there? And sometimes
But sometimes it's
I've had to say things like
there. It would never even occur to me that you would be there.
Yeah.
And so trying to figure out how, okay, now that I know you're there, I can probably work on it, but it just never occurred to me that you would be there.
It's a great.
Yeah, what did you do wrong that got you there?
I actually taught computer
But you're
classes
saving,
for a while.
you're saving the next professor.
Yeah.
Now they're going to be a little bit closer to not being there.
I taught computers like as you did, and it amazed me. They would come in and thought I was teaching them Word or PowerPoint or whatever, and didn't know that they had never turned on a computer before. They didn't tell me that. So when I said, okay, click on this, and they're using the mouse like a clicker.
The remote control.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Now
I didn't
you know
know you were
level.
there.
Yes, I had the one ask me about the cup holder. That would be the CD-ROM.
What's that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep, that happens. That happens.
But mine doesn't have the cup holder.
That's very imaginative.
Translating it, I just, it's one of those, until that day, I had not prepared for that question.
Right.
But after that, you're prepared for that question. So, all right. So back to the issue of goals. So games are really good at goals, right? Okay. So here's my old days from World of Warcraft. Okay. So everything's really clear, right? I got a bunch of goals over here. Right now, in this point in the game, whenever this was, I had 11 out of 25 slots of quest filled up, okay? So I could have multiple quests going on at the same thing. This is another thing to think about. Everything doesn't always have to be, I do this, then I do this, then I do, now sometimes it does, obviously. Sometimes if whatever you're learning, you have to learn one thing before the next. But thinking about giving them multiple goals is sometimes helpful. But what's really cool here is it's always very clear what to do next. And again, going back to your point, we may think that we told them what to do. We may think it's really obvious what to do next, but there is power in having it right in front of me. This is what you do next. Okay, you did this. This is what you do next, okay? So games are really good at showing me what the goals are, and then keeping track of it, showing me my progress, we're gonna talk about that, and overlapping them. So sometimes as I'm working through one part of the story, I find this magical sword that then helps me with something else. I'm like, oh, well now I'm almost, I finished this part, but now I got this great thing. I gotta go try it out, right? I'm not gonna just go to bed now. Now I gotta go try out this magical sword. And then that keeps me going. So there's always a what's next. There's always an inherent building of here's what's going on and here's what I can do. Now, in a minute, I'm gonna have you start to come up with a goal that you're gonna work on for the rest of today. But I'm gonna show you some examples first of ways that perhaps we can be a little gameful. The first couple are not educational necessarily, but just to start to get you thinking about how you can translate a goal into some sort of activity that perhaps you hadn't thought of before. So here's our first example. Here's the problem that this person was trying to solve. 13,000 lives lost to speeding. That's a pretty, that's a problem. That's a very specific, important issue to work on, okay? And the way this was solved was by this man. And there's a video, but I'm not gonna worry about it not playing because I know we had some problems earlier. I'm just gonna talk you through it. But this is Kevin Richardson. And what he did was he built what's called the Speed Camera Lottery. And it's one of the oldest and probably one of the more publicized examples of early gamification, which is why I throw it in there because you probably can find a lot about it if you want to look into it more. But basically what he did was, and it was sponsored by Volkswagen, they had something called the Fun Theory years ago as a contest, and he won the contest with the Speed Camera Lottery. So how it worked was, they set up a speed camera. We're familiar with those, I know, boo, exactly, boo. But this one's different. So the speed camera is on this sign that shows you how fast you were going. We've seen stuff like that before, that's nothing new about that. But as you passed, it either gave you a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down. So it gave you some immediate feedback in a different way than you usually get it. It's also very public. As you're driving down the road and that green light goes on, everybody behind you can see if you were speeding or not. There's some social pressure there. There's definitely a little social aspect there. So it takes the picture, it does the usual stuff. It takes a picture of the license plate. If you were speeding, send your name off to the collection people, whatever, and they send you the ticket, which hopefully you can. They actually set this up in Sweden, so I'm sure they did. They followed the rules. They followed the rules. So they paid the ticket. But if you went through the camera and you got the green light, your name went into a lottery. And all the money that was collected from the speeders was dispersed to the people who did it right. So now there's a little element of chance. There's nothing wrong with having a little element of chance to things. People don't, as long as the rules are clear and fair, people don't mind. You can throw in a little randomness, a little chance, something like that. You don't have to worry about that, even in a, I'm not saying with their grades or something, in an activity, that's okay. It can be a little fun to have, I was the winner today, or whatever, whatever it was. So that was his solution to the problem, was this speed camera lottery. So all he did was he took an idea that everybody already knew and had been used for years and whatever. He just twisted it a little bit. He added a little bit of, there's a little bit of social there. There's some social responsibility too, right? Now I know if I have speed, I gotta pay, and other people get the money, and then some people get pissed off at that. They're like, well, I don't want them to get my money, so I'm not gonna speed. So there's some social stuff there. And there's a little fun and all that stuff, okay? So they set the camera, they actually built it. They set it up in a very busy area in Stockholm, and they left it up for a weekend. And on average, speeding was reduced by 22% in one weekend. Again, is that perfect? No. No perfect solution necessarily. But that's a big deal. I mean, that's, you probably save some lives there. So 22% is not insignificant to get people to slow down. So it worked, is the point. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. So that's what I want you to start thinking about. We're going to think about a problem that you have with your class, your students, whatever, however you want to approach this. We're going to leave a lot of latitude there. And like, how can we maybe, let's start to think about how we can turn it a little bit. Okay. So that's one thing with goals. Another thing with goals is I've been talking a lot about learner. It's about the learner. Anybody not recognize this logo? Everybody knows what that is.
Sometimes Reebok.
So just do it. So anyway, so Nike logo. What does Nike sell? I say shoes, athletic, yeah. Okay. So their goal is to get me to buy stuff, right? That's really their goal. Okay. But one of the things that they sell, and were one of the early ones to sell, were fitness bands. Well, first they were in your shoe, and then they built bands to track runners, to track running. Okay. So does Nike care how fast I run or how far I run? They care that I buy the product. But I bought the product for one reason, and maybe you bought it for a different reason, and you a different reason, because we all had different goals. So, for example, I have a Fitbit. My husband had one. He purchased his originally because he was trying to lose weight. Then, one of my other friends bought it just because she sits at a desk all day, and she wanted to have a reminder to get up and move around. So we all had different goals necessary, maybe from why we were wearing the fitness bands. Nike didn't care what our goal was, but look how nicely the two goals aligned. I need their product to satisfy my goal, and they win too. This is the same thing with your learners. What are their goals? And how is this fitting in with their goals? Because ultimately, we can only do so much. They are going to choose to participate or not participate. They are individuals, and they can do that. So, but if we can find those places and we can show them those places where what they want and what we want them to do are in alignment, you get a much higher response, okay, in general. So that's something to think about with the goals too. Also, the big thing, and if you don't remember anything else I said today, this is probably like the three main words. Make progress visible to them. They need to know that they're progressing, okay? This chart, again, this is from Fitbit tracker, whatever. And you're like, wow, that doesn't look so great. I mean, 5,000 steps, that's not very many. That's, that says champ, yay. Well, the story changes when I tell you that this chart, this is not my chart, this chart is an 85-year-old woman who uses a walker, who's had both legs broken in a car accident, broke her hip, been in the hospital, has all kind of health problems, uses oxygen, and she still walks more than 5,000 steps a day. That changes the story a little bit. And the reason it changed the story for her was because she knew she needed to get up and walk every day, right? After being in rehab and things, she knew she needed to, but we've all done this, whether it's fitness or whatever. I'll do it tomorrow. It's raining, but we're not here, but okay, it's hot. You know, it's like we come up with whatever excuse. I'm tired. I'll do it next time, whatever. But as soon as we put that information in front of people and they can see, here's where I am, here's how much I progressed, here's where I'm going, there's magic in that. And games are great at this. That's why most games you see have all sorts of statistics all over the screen, giving you all sorts of feedback constantly. Now, I don't think you always have to go to that extreme, but there are ways that you can build into your classes to make their progress more visible. They need to know that they are making progress. And this may be, progress may mean something different to different people. You know, if somebody who's struggling, progress may mean, I did 20 math problems today because I'm really trying to get through that concept. For somebody else, progress may mean, okay, I mastered that and I went through the next 3 modules and, you know, whatever. Progress could mean different things. But making the progress visible matters. Because as soon as and this happens to be my mother, that's why I know. As soon as we put that Fitbit on her, and she could see every day if she was doing it or not doing it, there's no getting away from it, can't cheat. It's like, I either did it or I didn't do it. Guess what? She doesn't miss many days. And if she does, there's a really good reason for it. So making the progress really visible to learners. Anytime you can find a way to do that, it can be really helpful. And this again comes from the research. Teresa Anvil wrote a book called The Progress Principle. She was studying in a corporate environment, but she's done other research with education in other areas, and she shows that it is the best way to motivate people. Absolutely. People don't mind things being difficult. They don't mind challenges. They'll push through things. They'll struggle with things as long as they can see that they're making some progress. Not making progress is where people shut down. That's where they completely shut down. Which brings me to our friend back here playing Candy Crush. So, I don't know if you can see it from here, but these are blinking right now. We got our little blinking lights there. If anybody has ever played one of these type of games, you know, this morning, if anybody has played one of these games today, you know that when you're playing one of these games, if you do not make a move in a designated period of time, it starts nudging you. It starts blinking, okay? Anybody know why it does this? From a game design perspective, why they build this in? What is the goal of any game designer? One of the goals. Keep you playing, okay? If I get stuck, what do I do?
You need a hint.
I need a hint. If I get stuck, I stop.
Right.
If they give me a hint, and I play it, and I guarantee this is never the best answer.
No, it's not.
Rarely, if ever, the best answer.
But it is an answer.
It's an answer, and that keeps me playing because I would rather fail than get stuck. I want to keep playing, and it wants me to keep playing. Yes!
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's the best answer. What it's telling you is there still is an answer.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. It's that gameful mindset that we talked about earlier. Gamers believe there's an answer. Gamers believe there's a way to figure it out. That's why they will play the same level 27,000 million times. Yes?
No, I'm just hiding it
yeah.
because I'm starting to like.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're starting to play it in your head.
Sorry, yeah, that's okay. We're gonna get that one off of there, and I'll explain what this one is in a minute. Just ignore this one for a second. Okay. So yes, so that is such a key thing about how our brains work. We would rather fail than get stuck. Now, obviously, our goal is not to make the learners fail. Okay, we're gonna talk about failure some more later. But what happens when you fail on a level in a game? What does it do?
Let you
Start you
restart.
back. It lets you restart. It lets you try again. It actually usually says, play again, try again, you know, something like that. It gives you that nudge. It gives you another hint. There's nothing wrong with hints. Do we give our students enough hints? Can we give them a hint? How do we give them a hint? You know, depending on what the thing is. So yeah, anytime you can further them continuing to play, keep them playing, because there really is. There's nothing more frustrating. Since I have all my math people here, I will confess my sins. The one class in the entire history of my academic career that I almost failed was high school geometry. I did not have a very good teacher. I'm not blaming the teacher, but I did not have a good teacher. I learned nothing because I got stuck and I couldn't get unstuck and I shut down. And there was nothing after that. So I know, and everybody I see nods, we all know that. If you get stuck, it's just painful and it's really hard to get a student out of that. Because now I have that, I can't do this. Like, it's hard to get the momentum back. But if it's like, okay, I didn't quite get that, but I can try it again. You know, and that's the whole nature of testing too. I mean, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about testing because I know everybody has special requirements and there's state regs and there's all that. But when possible, you know, why does testing always have to be one and done? Does it always have to be one and done? Sometimes it does. Sometimes there's reasons and requirements and, you know, there's the final exam and that's it. But sometimes along the way, there's those opportunities. Maybe they don't get full credit, but what if a student got an 80 on a test and they said, you know what, I'm really not happy with this grade and I really want to understand this concept. And they go back and they rework and they explain to you their thought, or, you know, I don't know, you know, it could be whatever the topic is. Maybe they only get half of the points back. You know, I'm not saying they should get, you know, rewarded for not learning it when they were supposed to or whatever. And I'm not rewarding somebody who didn't bother to study. But, you know, there are those opportunities sometimes to, is there a do-over? Can there be a do-over? And it's not always about, oh, I'll give you extra credit assignments, you know, go do some more homework or something. So it's just something to think about is, you know, anytime, you know, a little hint. And I've also seen people do things like, we're going to talk about point scales and using points in classes later. But the idea of sometimes you have points that are related to the grade. Okay, these are my points that have to do with my grade. But sometimes you can have a second scale of points where students build up points that they can trade in for something. I'd like to buy a hint. I'd like to, you know, buy, you know, I really have a family emergency. Can I turn in my paper one day late? I'd like to buy an extension. I'd like to, you know, there's, you know, some trade-off for, and, you know, that's, again, that can be separate from the grade. I'm not trying to, you know, change the academic thing. But acknowledging that these are adults, these are human beings who have, you know, real life things that happen outside of the classroom and things like that, and giving them some options. I'd like to buy one teacher I know used to do that. I think that was more in high school, but students could buy a hint for one question on the test. You could buy a hint. I'm going to give you the answer, but I'll give you a hint to one question that you had to use. And then that's a whole decision. That's a whole decision thing with the student now. Okay, am I going to use the points for that? Am I going to, you know, that plays into their goals. You know, is it more important that I find this hint now or that I? So anyway, something to think about. All right. Also, just another example of goals, and this one does come from a university. This is from Ball State. They went big. Now, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is really at the course level or even at the activity level. They went big. Now, here was their problem. Because again, remember, that's what we're starting with. We've got to start with a clear definition of what my problem is. They had a population of students. These were mostly lower income, Pell Grant, first generation going to college. You know, these were some of them were non-traditional. Some of them could have been a little bit older. But they all kind of fell into this very high risk pool for for losing them. And so what they did, they got a grant. It was a very sizable one, as I remember. And they built an app. And it was only for those students. It was not released to all the freshmen. It was only for these students. And it was kind of like, if any of you ever used Foursquare, which is now Swarm, whatever, any of those sort of location check-in, you know, check-in apps. It was a similar sort of thing to that. And what they were trying to, what their sort of hypothesis was to solve their problem was, if they could find ways to build better community for that student and make them part of the university community, because again, these were not students that had any frame of reference or support system that really could nudge them how to be college students. But so they wanted to engage them on the campus, so they would give them points for things like checking in at the library, checking in at student services, you know, so that they knew where the different services were, they knew how to access different things, activities on campus. They would give them points or badges and things for things like that. And the points, the only thing they could trade the points in for was items at the bookstore that were university paraphernalia. Because again, they're reinforcing that branding of, you are a college student, you are in this school, and that's a big deal, and that's important, and you're part of this family. And so everything is geared toward that one goal of keeping that student there. Okay? Now again, I'm not always points, badges, leaderboards, not always the way to go. This worked in this instance. They've had a very good success rate with it. They're still doing it. They're improving the app. So they're still working on it. But I think it's a very interesting example of, here was our very specific problem. Here is one way to tackle it. Here's how we went about tackling it. And as I said, they've had a very nice return with what they've been doing. Okay. So just something to, again, that's on a much larger, university sort of scale. Now, going the other way, going much smaller. And before I show this next, I'm going to ask Judy to share a story that she shared with me during the break, because she had a really cool example. We were talking about the syllabuses earlier and all that stuff. So if you could tell them about your experience.
So one of my colleagues hands out a syllabus the first day, but he also hands out a play in 2 parts that students have to find somebody next to, and you read through it, and it points out the important parts of the syllabus. So, hey, have you heard about this guy? Yeah, well, I heard this. Yeah, but what if you miss class? Oh, but what about this? So he points out all this stuff. And there's certain things that they, like at one point, one of the people has to stand up, because then he knows where people are in terms of towards the very, like one of the very last things is one of them has to stand up. They both have an activity they have to do. So one of them does it early and the other one does it later, and that way he knows where people are in terms of reading it. But instead of him going over all the, and you know how you want to wear "It's on the Syllabus" t-shirt the first day? He doesn't have to, because they've gone through it all.
So there's so many great little gameful elements in there, because he's got the social in there. It's fun, it's different, it's engaging, it's got a little story to it. There's some characters and some personality. They're getting to know a little bit about the professor that way. They've got a little bonding going on there. Plus they're bonding with one of the other students. Got a lot of layers there, a lot of stuff, and they will remember more of it. And they're not going to remember every single detail, but they're going to remember that they did that activity and that it's probably in the syllabus. Now, it's not going to guarantee that they go read the syllabus or that they figure it out, but it's a great, I love that. I thought it was a nice little, and I thought it was something that definitely was worth passing along and whatever stuff. But don't all use it, because if you all use it, then it's all then that's not going to work. So she also was telling me a story that ties in with my next slide, which is why I stopped here, about how detailed sometimes we need to be with our list of objectives and things like that. And again, some of this goes back to assumptions we make, because sometimes we know too much. I intentionally used the word goals and didn't use learning objectives and all that kind of stuff, because I also like to think about, we all need to write our learning. We need to have those clear, instructionally designed, blessed learning objectives and all that stuff. But that's not always what you need to show the learner, right? You can show it to them in a different way. Instead of, this is objective number one, maybe it's a question. Like, hey, by the end of this, you'll be able to figure out how, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to necessarily word it in that and again, this goes back to we can be precise without being overly serious. All of the necessary information can be there, but it can be presented in a more accessible way. I talked about at the beginning about games not always being accessible. There's a lot of layers to accessibility. If English is not my first language, having to do every assignment I do in writing is not accessible. That adds a whole another layer of complexity to the learning process that distracts me from learning. So that's one of those things that I've worked with people to play with. Like, does everything have to be in writing? Now, obviously, if you're taking a writing course, or you're, depending on what the nature of the course is. But if it's a course where the answer, the activity you're working on is some sort of critical thinking thing, do they have to always write it down? I've had teachers who have said, you know what? I let the students do a little podcast. I let them just answer me the way they would if they were sitting there with me. They just record it. They upload the recording just like they would upload their Word document or whatever, and they can talk through it, and it's more natural. They feel more comfortable with it. And again, you may not do that with every activity, but again, that could be a scaffolding thing. Maybe at the beginning, we're trying to just get them comfortable with the concepts. That could be very helpful. Maybe this person is very artistic. Does every activity have to be writing? Maybe it's put together a diagram that explains something, or maybe it's something tactile. They create something, build something, whatever. Just something to think about. Going back to the kinesthetics and things. Everything, can we? Is there some way we can make these activities less text-based? Because that gets very wearing. And again, depending on the topic, it's not that relevant sometimes. It's like not as relevant as the concepts. I'm never diminishing the importance of these things. It's just sort of picking and choosing at that moment what we're going to do. All right. So this was one I had. I had this very long. It was a 6-week. It was teaching internal customer service skills in a business setting, so a little different. The course had a space theme, which is why everything's like flight crew and spacecraft and whatever. But when the course was originally put out, we were working with a vendor who hosted the whole thing. And it had a syllabus, not unlike some of the ones we talked about earlier. And it had all the information in there, and you're going to do these activities, and it had all these bullet points, and it had, this and that and whatever. And we did not have a lot of good completion of activities and things like that. And then through some bankruptcies and various things, we had to the vendor went away, we had to repackage the whole thing. And when I repackaged it, I took the information. There was no different information. And it's magical. I put a box here, and they could check it off to say they did it, and they did it. And they thanked me for it. Now that sounds so silly, right? It sounds silly that I put a checkbox on a form, and it made people do it. But checkbox says, check me off. I'm not complete until I see all those checkboxes checked off. Now, they could have checked off next to the bullet points. I didn't do anything magical here. But again, sometimes a small little twist of how something is presented. And again, even the syllabuses, even if you didn't I don't want to pick on just them, but we've been talking about them. Even adding more white space and putting a heading so it's very clear for them to find the different sections of the syllabus without changing a single word on the syllabus can make a difference. Because again, we always have to kind of flip around and go, okay, we know what's in there. We know it's all in there. But how do we make it easier for them to find it? Yeah?
I just want to share another example of making
Great.
a small change that can change the whole interaction. Because one of our faculty, he's trying to do this flipped classroom.
Okay.
So he would come to class and then he would write the problem numbers on the board.
Okay.
In class today, we're gonna do problems 12, 15,
Mhm.
26 on page whatever.
Okay.
And the students would groan. And then one day, he decided to create his own problems instead of using problems, so he made a worksheet with his own problems.
Mhm.
And then they were all, oh, we're so glad that you made the problems and that, you know,
Yes.
it's the same problem. You know,
Mhm.
it's just the presentation.
The presentation
All
of
of a
it.
sudden they engaged.
The presentation of it, exactly, exactly.
And then-
It does, and I've done things like that with, just putting the numbers on pieces, and this, again, super low tech here, kids. Putting the numbers of the problems on pieces of paper and taping them on the wall. I've actually done this. And said, okay, which one are we gonna do first? And they picked, and then they're like, oh cool, we get to pick. Like, it can be the smallest thing. It really can. Sometimes it can really be the smallest thing. And that's why I encourage you, try something, just try a little something different. A little something different, and it can make a big difference, yeah. It's the, you never know. You just never know with that little thing. It can make a difference, yeah. I love that. Anybody else have any other examples that they wanna pitch in there? At any point, just jump in there, Yes.
I teach pharmacology, so
Okay.
it's a very dry subject.
That's a little bit dry. But,
so-
oh my God, but there's so many stories there. They're saving the world, they're saving lives.
Exactly. So, as their big project, they get to do a field trip, which they
Okay.
hate until they do it, then they have fun with it.
Yeah.
But they have to go out and I give them a little tiny scenario. Somebody ate too much candy over
Yeah.
Halloween and they have a stomach ache and they don't have any money to go to a doctor. You get to choose what they need to take. And I tell them they can use over-the-counter, they can use an auntie or a grandma or a cousin or anybody. You know, they can go out and find homeopathic methods. And they have two rules. They cannot talk to a pharmacist
Okay.
and they cannot use a computer.
Oh,
And it
interesting.
forces them to have to go out and talk to people. God forbid they do that. But they come back with the most amazing learning
Yes.
that is phenomenal, and they
Yes.
have fun with it. And I don't care how they present it.
Yeah.
And some of them make food for you, and some of them will make posters and PowerPoints and.
I love that. Yes.
And they get to do whatever they want to with it, and it is so valuable.
It is, it's totally valuable. And I would say the thing, and her example, I understand, because part of the problem is there's going to be resistance to something different. Like, it's not just something I read in the textbook and answer a question. Like, wait a minute, I don't know how to do this one. And sometimes we do have to kind of walk them through, and again, tell them, yes, you have to know the answer that's going to be on the test. Yeah, sometimes we do have to do a little bit of that front end work to kind of prepare them. Like, this is going to be different. Like, it's okay to say that. Like, day one, look, this is going to be different. There's going to be some, things you're not used to. We're going to try them out. It's going to, you're basically like, you're going to be fine. Yeah, everybody's going to be fine. Put your mask on before assisting, you got to give them a little safety drill, but sometimes you do have to do that because it is kind of a jarring thing too. I mean, when you're used to, I just go in, I read the syllabus, or I don't read the syllabus, and things, magically don't happen or whatever. Sometimes you do have to actually build that in. And again, think about a game, playing games. Games are really good at that. You go into the game, and it tells you only what you need to know right that second, right? Get you started. And then it's like, okay, so try this out. Let's try this out. How'd that work? How'd that go? Okay, well, how about do this and this? How'd that work? So there sometimes does have to be a little bit of that sort of ramping up to get them prepared to accept this new vision that you have. So that kind of thing. All right. Another interesting, just while we're talking about like little tricks that people pull, whatever. In psychology, there's a theory called endowed progress, and this goes back to that making progress visible. Did a study. It was a car wash, And they gave the people at the car wash one of two tickets. The first one they gave them was one of those that says, here, after 8 car washes, you get one free. Okay? It was just a ticket. Nothing's punched out. It's just like that. Then they had a second batch of people that they gave the tickets to, and they had the first 2 punched out. Still needed to get 8 car washes to get it done, right? Okay? But I already had the first 2 punched. So then they came back. People wash their car, what, every month maybe? Every, I don't know, week, couple of, depends on the area, I guess, how dirty your car gets. But in this area, they went back like about 9 months later. They gave it some time. They went back. And the people that had gotten the unpunched cards, about 19% of them had cashed in for the free car wash. Okay, the pre-punched ones was about 34%. Now, this is just one of those little brain things. Like, the perception was that they'd already started, like, and it works. It's silly, and we all can laugh at it, and it works. But this is actually going to something we're going to talk about later, which is how motivation works. People are really motivated at the beginning and at the end. So if you can give them that initial, and that's why games, the first couple of levels are usually really easy, right? It's kind of click, it depends on the game. Click the button. Some of them are like, click the button, hey, you're on level 2, right? Congratulations. Yeah. So, and then, and then it ramps up, and then you have to do more and more and more and more. So anyway, but that's the whole psychology behind that is you give them those quick, early things that they did, and they got those, and okay, I get a little momentum, I can do this, and then they get into it. In the middle, that's where it gets real fuzzy, because I'm kind of past the excitement of it getting started, but I'm not quite to the point where I'm at those last few. Because what happens when I get to those last few? Oh my God, I'm almost there. If I just, just push through those last couple, of things or whatever. And that there's Dan Ariely wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. It's all about behavioral economics. And it's things that we make totally stupid choices on certain things, but we're human and that's how our brains work. That's just how it works. Yes?
I'm gonna rant a little bit.
You can rant.
So like you were just talking, in games, a lot of times the beginning levels are pretty easy to progress, and then it gets a little harder and a little harder. The problem I found with games is it's a logarithmic scale.
It is.
And
awesome.
So as you get to the higher, it takes more and more and more. And then I usually quit.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about that.
Because now it's not worth my investment.
Yes.
Some of them
It always has to
games
be
like that.
valuable to you. And that's the thing. That's one of the main reasons we quit. It just doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't want to play anymore. It just isn't providing me whatever it was providing you for, whether it was entertainment or information or whatever. I'm going to stop. That's a great point. Yeah, you're going to stop. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to the. That's fine. No, but nice little foreshadowing there. I like that. We'll just see how it's all together. But yeah, no, that wasn't a rant though. That wasn't ranting.
Well,
I wasn't
going
feeling
to
the
be a
rant.
rant, and then I tell you.
Okay. I was expecting fire and brimstone.
I was about, because that's one of my pet peeves. Like I'm playing RuneScape, and in order to get my next level on my mining, I have to go mine 10 million.
You have to grind and grind and grind.
And it's like, I'm going to get a bot to do this.
Yes.
Thank you very much, because it's not worth my time.
Well, that's a great point too, because that goes back to the issue of there's and gaming would be called grinding, but we do that in education too, right? It's like, okay, do 20 math. I'm not picking on the math teacher. Do 20. Do 20 more problems. Do 20 more. If you just grind away at it long enough, you'll get it. It's that labor-intensive, right? Labor-intensive mastery. And some things you have to. There are some things that you just have to repeat. You just have to do it. But when possible, if we can go for a performance issue over a labor-intensive thing, and often That's a clever way of using autonomy, giving learners 2 choices of activities. Just like I did with the first one. He said it perfectly. He didn't choose the first activity because that looked hard. It looked like that was going to be harder. Okay, so maybe he would rather grind away and do the 20 math problems, and that's okay, if it gets him to where he needs to go. That's the caveat there. If it gets him to where he needs to go. Maybe somebody else only needs to do 5 math problems, but they, they got it. Like, why do I need to make them do 20? That's just silly. That's just, now they're going to
give up.
They're going to be, like, oh my God, really? I have to do, like, this is just stupid. She's wasting my time. This isn't important to me. I'm bored.
But, some people believe that that's the way to success.
I know.
That if you do 20 math problems, you will somehow get it.
Yes.
And if you do the same 20
Yes.
math problems the wrong way, you're going to
You're going to get it. It's going to match. It's going to happen. On number 20.
And it's so
The enlightenment will happen.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
So yeah, and that's what I guess sometimes the hardest part of this whole gamification thing is kind of, you gotta dance around people's like, oh my God, but this is different and that's not how you do it. I have to do the 20. What do you mean I don't have to do 20? I have to do 20. I definitely have to do 20. Because that's how we always did it before.
That's the way this instructor and that instructor and that
Exactly, that's what we did last semester, and that's the way you do it, and you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right.
I had a student actually say that to me in class. I was teaching this class and I wanted to do something a little different. And she kept insisting, no, you're doing it the wrong way. And I said, no, this is why I want you to do it this way. And she finally said, okay, whatever. And then she turned to her group mates and said, I'll show you the right way.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'll show you. Yeah. That goes back to you had some of those griefer kind of people too. But again, sometimes we can get around them. Sometimes we have to be a little clever. Okay, so Miss, I know the right way. Whatever. We'll call her Connie. I don't know why. We'll call her Connie. Because it's easier to put a name to it, right? So Connie. Now, Connie may be an overachiever. Connie may have issues. I don't know what Connie's problem is. But, okay, maybe Connie does get it. Maybe Connie got it after, and she's just bored now or whatever. So now she's just being disruptive. So that's where you can do things like, and I'd love to see somebody actually do this as a study, because I don't have the resources to do it right now. But based on anecdotal and my personal experience, do any of you in your courses have like, here's the things you have to do, and then here's the additional material that you could, if you want to go check it out? Anybody have any of those? Sometimes, yeah. But you know what I mean, right? There's like, there's the required stuff, and then there's the, hey, additional materials for those who are really overachieving. I really want to know everything there is to know, and whatever. Well, what I've done sometimes, and I've gotten other people to do, is don't put that in there. Once they have finished the required stuff, then you say, oh, Connie, since you seem to have already mastered this part, here's the other 15 problems you can do. And this additional info, look at this. This is the additional. You've unlocked this additional information. So now they get that little status thing. They get to go, I'm special. I got the extra stuff. And it doesn't overwhelm the other learners who look at it and go, oh my God, I can't even get through this part, and now there's that other stuff that maybe I should be looking at, and what about that? So it kind of helps both groups. It kind of helps the people that can't get through or having trouble getting through the main part. But then it keeps those advanced learners busier. And I'm not saying do busy work, but I mean, it acknowledges that, okay, you only needed to do 5 problems to master this concept that I need you to know. So rather than let them sit there and be bored or disruptive or whatever, that doesn't really solve the I know the right way part, but it can take some of that disruptive element out by sort of acknowledging, okay, you did really well, you got there a little faster than some of the others, so hey, here's something else you could consider. You could try this. whatever. So it's just something to think about. Because I've noticed just from looking at the web statistics on things, that when you put all the stuff in there up front, very few people go to the additional information. But if you present it as something special, it's a gift, it's something special, you're great, you achieved something, you unlocked this, they're more likely to go look at some of it.
Sounds like a special balance, though.
It is.
With being able to prevent, say, lower self-esteem with the rest of the group.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's you know, all these things have sort of, you kind of have to weigh them. Yeah, that's a great point, Sam. You have to kind of weigh them out, and how you present that to people.
Like this person.
Yeah. Well, that's why. Well, we'll talk about leaderboards in a minute. That's why I rarely, if ever, use anything like that, because I don't want the people who are struggling to have yet another reason to feel bad and not, you know, whatever. Okay. Just to finish up with the goals things before we do an activity. A couple of other ways that you can use goals, interestingly, is having the goal really mean something. Like we've been talking about, like if doing the activity doesn't mean anything to the learner, they're not interested in it. But if you can find a way to tie it to something, like, you know, pharmaceutical, you know, you're saving somebody. I worked with somebody who worked with EMT workers, and they were having trouble getting the EMT workers to follow procedures because it is their instinct to help, not to stop and put on their mask, and not to stop and take precautions. And she was struggling with, how do I build this course to get them to do these things? And one of my suggestions to her was, I said, it's very hard for people to think long term. This is another problem with semester-long courses. It's very hard to think what's going to happen, you know, down the road. Goals, and we'll talk about this a little more in a second, the shorter you can make them. If you can chunk things down into smaller pieces, they're concrete, they're accessible, people can process that. It's very fuzzy when things get to be what's going to happen weeks and months, and in the case of the EMTs, it was years later. But I said, but we may have to play on that. We may have to play on how many people are you not going to be able to save next year or the year after that because you didn't put that mask on today. Because now you're going to become the victim, you're going to have the respiratory problem, and you're not going to be able to be the lifesaver. And so we started to try to play with it. So sometimes you have to find that sort of bigger calling, you know, depending on what the topic is, if you can find something. So this was just an interesting example, I thought, of what Jay McGonigal would call epic meaning, like in games, epic meaning. And the example was that particularly in Europe, they were having problems with blood donations. Obviously, there's a big, when there's a big natural disaster or something, people go out, they donate, everybody jumps on board, but then in those intermediate periods, blood supplies dip, it's hard to get people to donate. So what they did was, when you went and you donated blood, they sent you a text message that thanked you, and that's pretty, that they probably had always done. Just a little thank you for donating, this is, you know, really important, we appreciate it, whatever. But then, they twisted it a little, and when the blood donation was used, they sent a second text message. Yeah. Now, of course, they didn't reveal there's no privacy issues here. They just said, your blood donation just saved someone, or something to that effect. How do you think that person felt? That's pretty powerful, right? Because you donate blood, you know you're doing something important, but it kind of...
You never see it.
You never see it. You never see the end result. Here, you're like, wow, there's a little surprise there, there's the social connection, I did something altruistic and it really mattered, there's meaning to it. So again, a lot of layers there, and it's such a simple little thing. And that's why I love these examples, because quite often, and this goes back to the issue of nudges and hints, if you have the technology able to do it, sending out those nudges. Hey, I see that you participate, I see you access the course 3 times this week. That's really, that's, good for you. You are working at it, or you haven't accessed the course, like, hey, send a little nudge, like, is there something that's, confusing you? Is there something we can help you with to, get you back on track? to, you know, any of those little nudges, because with technology, you know, we have a little more flexibility with offering those kind of personalized things like that. So that's something to think about. Those can be very powerful as well. All right. And again, as I was talking about a minute ago, anytime you can take a big goal and make it into little goals, you're much more likely to get the person to do it. Okay? If you give them, and that's kind of, you know, it's the overwhelming thing. It's like if you give somebody like, oh my God, you're going to do all these 27 things and blah, 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 and it's not structured in a way that makes it clear, like, okay, these are small things. You can do this. You just have to kind of chip away at it and whatever. So anytime you can shrink the change, it really can help. And that goes also to, this is the behavioral model from Professor Fogg. And he talks about, and this one's actually kind of interesting because we always talk about, you know, our learners aren't motivated, right? We complain that they're just not motivated. The interesting thing here is changing somebody's motivation is a really hard lift. It is hard to change someone's motivation. I mean, obviously if there's some big life-changing event or something, people get motivated to do something, but generally speaking, it's much harder to change someone's motivation than it is to chunk something down and make it easier. Now again, this is not dumbing it down. This is, you know, back to that precision question. This is not about I'm dumbing it down, I'm making it simpler, more, you know, like I'm not, you know, it's not that it's not, we're not going to go through all the very complex and all the stages and everything, but if I can chunk it down and make it easier to do, so more steps may be all it takes, just making sure the person gets through all the things. So that's what's kind of interesting here. So basically you have to have a trigger for something to happen. That could be an internal trigger. You're very motivated and you know that every morning you get up and you check Facebook. Right? You don't need an external trigger for that. Sometimes these are external triggers. Somebody tells you that you need to do something, or your phone dings at you and tells you that you need to do something, or something like that. So you have to have a trigger, but if you're highly motivated, it can be, as we talked about earlier, it can be really hard if somebody really, really, really wants to do it. It doesn't take much to get them to do it. Likewise, if something's really easy to do, you don't need quite as much motivation to get them over that hurdle. Okay? So again, I'm not suggesting you make things dumb them down, but sometimes if you can give them just that little bit of, okay, let's just do this little piece and a little piece and a little piece, and then you pair that with the making the progress visible so that they see, hey, if I do these little pieces, they make a big piece, and then the big piece adds to another piece, and then I'm done, and I did it. So that can really help. All right, before I have you do the activity, we're going to have a flashback to the 80s, to the band Van Halen for my last goal example. Because I think this one is really smart. I really like this one. Van Halen was one of the first bands that traveled around with the big trailer trucks with all the equipment. Okay? And they would go around to these stadiums, and the stadiums also had not had lots of bands come that had all this equipment. They weren't always equipped to handle the electrical loads, to know how to set things up properly, and the band had a lot of problems in the early days with blown fuses and the speakers and the fires and the whatever. So their problem was they wanted to present these concerts safely with their equipment working, and they needed to make sure that these concert venues knew how to set the equipment up and set it up correctly so that everything would work. Okay, so that's their problem. Their problem is they want to get the equipment set up correctly in the concert venue. All right. So they decided that what they needed to do was twofold. First, they needed to document what needed to be done. Right? That's the easy part, really, right? We make all the schematics and we say do this, this, this. We write it all down. The hard part, as we've been talking about today, is getting them to read that and getting them to follow those instructions. So what they started doing was they started doing somewhere in the middle. Let's say there were 20 bullet points or whatever. Number 17 was when we arrive in the dressing room, we want a plate of M&Ms that are all the green ones have been taken out. Okay? It's stupid. It sounds really stupid, right? And people, of course, being rock stars, a lot got made of all of this. And oh my God, they asked for all these crazy things. And the reason they asked for it was because if they walked into the dressing room and they saw no M&Ms, or they saw M&Ms with green ones, what did they know? They didn't follow the directions. So then what did they have to do? They had to do a full check of all of the equipment before the show started. If they got there and the plate of M&Ms was right, they had at least some level of certainty that they paid attention and they had followed the instructions. Not to say that they couldn't have missed something. They still had to do basic things. But this is such a clever thing. And in games, there should be kind of an Easter egg. Be kind of a little Easter egg thing. And this can be very, very effective. There's nothing saying you can't sneak a little funny thing in somewhere. A little thing to see if they're, like your example with, they had to stand up at some point while they're reading the thing. That's how he knew they were reading it. You can have those little activities. You can sneak those in places and have them do something that lets you know that they paid attention and that they were following the instructions. Okay, so I just think this is such a clever kind of, subtle thing, and but it works. It totally works. And then you'll have some students who really go looking for them. Once they find out that they're in there, like they're determined they're going to find them all. And so, all right. Any thoughts or questions about the goals? Okay. We're bumping up pretty close to lunch, but I'm going to tell you what the activity is. We can start, and then we can snack and get your thoughts together and whatever, and then we'll regroup after lunch and we'll kind of chat through what it is. So what we're going to do is I want each of you, and if you want to work in pairs or you want to work, with all of you at the table, however you want to break it up, I want you to think about these questions. And you don't have to do them. This is not like answer question 1, answer question 2. These are just some thought-provoking things. I want you to think about what is a problem you would like to try to solve. So something, I know many of you, I've read, I think I got everybody's card by now. I've read most of the cards, if not all of them. A lot of you said, oh, I need an idea that I can take back and put into play. So I want you to think about something specific, because we can't fix everything at once. You're going to want to think about one thing. So like, is my issue I want to focus on, is it going to be that I want the students to participate more in the discussion forum? Is the issue that I need the students to turn things in on time in a more, is that the issue? I don't know what your issue is, so I don't want to put too many thoughts in your head. That's your issue. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? Now, and this is the whole beautiful thing about games too. The assessment is already built in to a game. I either get past the level or I don't. I either learned how to do it, I figured it out, or I didn't. And so by the time I get to that big boss fight at the end, I have all the equipment and the skills and the whatever and whatever. And I may not win on the first time, but at least I've got where I'm going. So what does success look like? How will I know that this fixed the problem? So there's got to be some measurable, there's got to be some way to know that. What might that pathway look like? We start thinking about, how do I get there? Are there ways I can make the progress visible along the way? So we're going to think about, what we're thinking about here is just my goal, sort of my goal pathway. Where am I trying to get to? Is part of the problem that I need to break things up more? Is part of the problem that the students just don't have a clear pathway to where they're going? So just give a little thought to those. Talk amongst yourselves. Work on your own, however you feel comfortable. And like I said, we'll work until it's time to break for lunch. And then after lunch, we'll come back and maybe share where some people are starting to think about going. Because we're going to build on this all afternoon, this question. All right?